Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on Interfaith Leadership Online. And today we are going to be practicing what we are talking about. We have an amazing panelists here who are going to help us think through what Interfaith Leadership Online looks like. And we also welcome all of you. You represent the rainbow of traditions. You represent a vast diversity of age and interests. You come from higher education, religious communities, all across. And so we welcome all of you. This is going to be an important conversation. Hopefully we will all learn something from one another. We will all grow in our own interfaith leadership and recognize the specific nature of interfaith leadership as practiced online. And hopefully you will walk away with more equipped with resources and ways to exercise that in this moment when we really need that kind of leadership, perhaps more than ever. I want to just recognize that we are not going to have an open chat today because there's so many people here, but we do encourage you to submit questions in the Q&A box below. We will be getting to questions at about, let's see, I'm in Eastern Standard Time. I'm in New York. So about 1:35 my time, but that varies from wherever you are. And we look forward to having a robust conversation. We want to do a special thank you to Carrie Rottenborn, who is going to be doing closed captioning for us. This is another way that we can guarantee that all people are equally able to access and appreciate this conversation. And in the tomorrow, we will be sending you all a link to this webinar. And there will be a story up on Interfaith America, which is launched on our platform at IFYC. And that will include the entire transcript. So thank you very much for joining us. I want to start by welcoming the panelists who are with me today. You all will be seeing their biographies in the there's bios, I guess is what we call them, in the chat box. But I want to name their important accomplishments. I'm going to start with Rabbi Joshua Stanton, who is an amazing rabbi, media savvy, has been in the digital space for as long as I can remember. He serves as the rabbi at East End Temple. He also is a senior fellow at Kalal, and he, just it goes on and on and on. He's just been an interfaith leader for as long as I can remember, as well as an important voice within the Jewish community. Amanda Quraishi is a digital strategist who lives in Austin, Texas. Shout out. She is the digital and social media director at the Texas Association of School Boards. And she's also the founder and director of something that I'm really interested in, which is the Institute for Digital Civic Culture, which is a training program designed to elevate online culture and empower leadership in digital spaces. And so I encourage all of you to check them out and for possible ways to move forward in your own online interfaith leadership. Q, as she goes by in her Twitter handle, has been involved with interfaith engagement locally and nationally, and is especially a leader in Muslim-Jewish relations. Simran Jeet Singh is another person who almost needs no introduction, but we will introduce him. He's an educator, a writer, an activist, and scholar. He's taught at universities. He is currently at Union Seminary, and he's just an important leader in the Sikh community and in the interfaith community. So I also want to give a shout out for his most recent contribution, which is a children's book called Raushenbush Singh Keeps Going, and it's the true story of the oldest person to run a marathon, and it's a children's book, the first one with to center a Sikh story. So I want to welcome the panelists, and thank you so much for being with all of us and all of your time. I want to start with a quick parable story, which I love, which is two fish are swimming along, and an older fish comes by and asks them, "How's the water?" And the two younger fish keep swimming along, and eventually one of them says, "What the hell is water?" And for me, the internet now has become so ubiquitous, such a part of our lives. The distinction between IRL and URL has faded, and now even more than ever, we realize that. And yet, I don't think those of us in religious leadership and specifically in interfaith leadership have spent enough time talking about the specific roles and the way that this water works, the way the water has its own ebbs and flows, the way it can be life-giving and dangerous, and so that is a metaphor I'd like you to start with. I'm going to give you a few quotes that I think are important. One of the founders of Google, Eric Schmidt, said, "The internet is the first thing that humanity has built that humanity doesn't understand." There is a lot that we're still learning about the internet. There's a lot of ways that things are evolving in ways that could not have been anticipated. They're happening very fast. And it's important for those of us who yearn for a civil society that is just, that treats every person with dignity, that we begin to try to understand it and recognize the potency of where we're dealing with and where we are. So this has all happened incredibly fast. The World Wide Web, as we know it now, is about 25 years old. This is very young technology. It's transformed our society. You know, some people say like the Gutenberg Bible, but it's not like that. It's actually Gutenberg Bible on steroids, because you can put things out as well as take things in. Some of our social media, you know, places that feel so like solid, like Facebook, is only 16 years old. Twitter is 14 years old. These are very new technologies. As Kevin Kelly, who is the founder of Wired magazine, said, "As far as the internet goes, nothing has happened yet." And yet we all know that so much has happened, and so much is happening because of the internet. And so, you know, there are so many examples of beauty that happens on the internet, beautiful internet interfaith connections that can happen, but there is also so much violence that can be fostered there. And so I just want to, you know, the way I talk about it is it's a blessing and a curse. And the more that we know, the more that we study it, the more that we learn the techniques that can help us, we can turn it into a blessing. And so that is what today's webinar is dedicated to, is to making the internet a blessing for more people and for this world. And so I asked our panelists to come up with scenarios, specific scenarios when they saw interfaith leadership at work or interfaith leadership not at work. You know, there's plenty of examples in both good and bad, and we can learn from all of it. But that's the way I want to start, is specific scenarios that can teach us some, you know, get us into the learning of what interfaith leadership can look like. So I want to start with you, Dr. Singh. Can you start us off?
Sure, no problem. And I think for me, the question is one that it's the kind of question where you hear it and a bunch of stories like flood into your mind. There's so many examples for me, and so I was reflecting on it last night actually, and I thought back to like the moment when I realized how powerful it could be, like personally, where it was personally affecting me. So that's the example I want to share today. My younger brother was the first to play NCAA basketball with the turban. So the first Sikh player to play in the NCAA, and you know, a lot of challenges come with that as it is. Add to that he was playing in Texas, and his the conference was the Southern Collegiate Athletic Conference. So he's traveling all over the South. So like all sorts of like all the ugly stuff you can imagine, that was part of his experience and our experience as a family. A few years after he finished college, this meme went viral online, and it was a photo of him in his uniform. and it said, "No one wants to guard Muhammad because he's too explosive." And we saw it. I don't know how much people are, follow these meme accounts, but I follow World Star Hip Hop, and like that's where I saw it. And this is like one of the larger platforms on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, like everything. So like all of a sudden it comes out and it's everywhere, and we didn't know how to react. Like this is my this is my brother, so like it's super personal, but it's also about our community and how we're portrayed. And it's also deeply rooted in Islamophobia. It's like all these like scary, messy things, and it all feels wrong. And so like when you're in a situation like that, and we have been before, you do what you can, but you usually can't really do all that much, right? Like how are you going to counteract something that World Star Hip Hop or whoever else puts out there where, they have much more platform and much more followers and much more power than you do. And then this really remarkable thing happened. Like one of Darsh's best friends from college, a devout Christian, Greg Worthington, he posted on Facebook, and he like all he said, and I just want to like I'll share with you a little bit of what he says, but he opens up with, "Let me tell you why this isn't funny. I know this guy. His name is not Muhammad. He's not Arab, he's Punjabi." And he goes on, his name is Darsh Singh. He's born and raised here. And he goes on and tells his story. It's nothing but a 400 word caption, right? Like it's nothing profound. It's not like he spent a day or two writing it, right? Like I talked to Greg and it took him an hour, but he wrote this response, and his response, Greg's response, that went viral in a way that no one really expected. And within a few days, it had about 25,000 likes and 10,000 shares, and so like all of a sudden, in a situation where we weren't able to speak for ourselves at the same level, like a friend of ours who had nothing at stake really was able to do that just by speaking up. And I want to close by just sharing his quote that he gave in this piece on NBC, right? The story was viral, so it was all over the news and, on TV and all that sort of thing. Greg gave this quote at the end that like really, when I was talking to him, spoke to the power of what he did. And he says, "Since receiving kind messages from Sikhs and others and reading what people have said when they shared my post, I realized that I had no idea how important it was to say something, even though I knew it was extremely important to do so. A stranger who's a Sikh that shared my post just said, 'Greg Worthington, you're a friend indeed.' It was extremely touching to know that I could be the kind of friend the Sikh community needs in times like these just by simply speaking out." And so the takeaway for me was like, you never know what you do or what you say that can hit, right? That's the nature of the internet. You never know what might make an impact. But I know personally, Darsh felt, and our family felt incredible gratitude to anyone and everyone from our communities who responded with something positive. And then the amplifying effect of it going viral like that has done that work, not just for our family, but for an entire community who was hurting. So that to me was like the moment, this was 5 years ago, the moment when I really saw in a personal way the power of an interfaith connection online.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It really, that I think that's like a foundational element of when will you stand up? When will you stand up? If you wouldn't mind, Dr. Singh, putting that story that you're reading from in the chat so that people might be able to have it, that would be great. Thank you. Amanda, would you go next?
Sure. I'd like to talk a little bit about not so much using social media as a broadcasting platform, which is, I think, where a lot of people go. That's their default, especially when you're talking to leaders, right? I think in this day and age, we're all kind of vying for attention in the attention economy. And so the first thing people think of when they go online is, how do I get a bunch of people to follow me and get a very big voice? And my work actually focuses in a little bit of a different area, which is around building community online, and not so much about using it as a platform to amplify messages as much as how do you convene people and how do you create spaces where people can go and have meaningful exchanges. And that is both in an interfaith context and actually in almost any context, right? I work with leaders who are not just religious leaders, but in all kinds of fields. And so, and I really think that that's where the value of being online lies. When we look at it as a virtual space, and when we look at the ability to transcend like time and space and to bring people across all these differences into unique places online to have important conversations. And so one of the things I appreciate in an interfaith context is I'm part of an organization called the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom. It's a large grassroots women's organization of Muslim and Jewish women in North America and Europe. And they have a Facebook group. I was honored to represent that group in the Facebook, their community leadership program. It was a fellowship program that Facebook did last year. And the reason why it's such a compelling group, why we were accepted into that program, was because that it is doing just that. It's not out there necessarily to send a message, rather, but to call people in and to create this sort of place where people can have very authentic, safe, and I don't believe that there's any real safe space online, but in order for people to have meaningful engagement online, we need to be able to be vulnerable, right? Otherwise it's just on the surface. And in order for people to be vulnerable, they need to be able to feel like they have a place where they understand the norms, where there are defined parameters, right? These are very, very basic social needs that people have. And so I do think that I've seen this replicated in lots of other ways. And there are some groups that are much better at doing this than others. But like, for example, last year or the year before, I can't remember when it was, when the synagogue in Philadelphia was attacked, we saw this, these people just kind of, women flooding to this group and really taking solace, right, with one another. And the exchanges that people were having were so meaningful and so profound. And in some ways, it's doing what traditional offline spaces, sacred spaces, and religious spaces have done for years, which is create a place where people can go and share these very important, sometimes tragic, sometimes beautiful things in their lives. Only it's being done in a digital way, and it's being done in across very different lines. And so to me, that's the promise of working online in a leadership role and in a role, especially around faith and spirituality, is how are we building out the internet in ways that we can facilitate these very, very human needs and these very human exchanges in new and interesting ways.
Thank you so much. That's such an important reminder. There's so many different textures to this work, and times for public statements, but also times for the calling in, for the conversation, for the deep engagement, and so thank you for that reminder. Josh, do you want to go next, please?
Absolutely. So I think that there are a number of roles that interfaith discourse and spiritual leadership can play online. One, as Amanda said, it's to help people deal with isolation and to engage further connection. One, as I'm going to call you Dr. Singh, even though we're running buddies. You're both, I guess, doctors. So Dr. Quraishi, Dr. Singh. Dr. Singh, you alluded to the idea that we can engage in public education and can actually counter stereotypes. And then I think there's also the building of basic religious literacy that supports people in their own internal lines of inquiry. There was a moment that I thought was an incredible teachable moment online that came about as a result of some really painful things. Towards the end of this year, there were a huge number of anti-Semitic attacks in the New York area, including a murderous rampage in the home of a rabbi just outside of New York City. And I was interviewed on television about it. And one of the questions was, how can we show solidarity with the Jewish community? It was in the middle of Hanukkah, in the middle of the darkest time of the year. And I said, just post on social media a menorah. Just put it up there. It's a symbol of light and hope and strength in a time that our community has needed it. And an incredibly well-meaning Christian leader in Canada posted a menorah that happened to be the menorah with a Christian fish in it from a Messianic Jewish website that some Jews viewed as appropriative, some Jews viewed as just awkward, some Jews viewed as tone deaf. And it was interesting for me to watch online as this image went viral, was shared, I think, 100,000 times. And the number of Jews who were not able to receive the blessing that it was intended to be was really striking to me as a rabbi. It's not as if this Christian leader went about sharing a symbol that accidentally could have been appropriative with malice in their hearts. They were trying to show solidarity, and yet there was a lack of awareness of the value of symbols themselves. And so it was a religious education moment, actually, to be able to stand up in this flood online and say, first of all, thank you. You are trying to show such support and kindness to the Jewish community when it needs it. And this is a particular symbol that has a different kind of valence to it. And there is a history here of supersessionism and appropriation, but you meant this well. So first, thank you. And let's take this moment and learn about each other and each other's symbols and why those symbols matter. And let's talk about authenticity in the online space, because I think that's one of the areas that religion and spirituality does quite well, which is bringing authenticity into a new medium. We did it with Gutenberg. In the case of many older traditions, mine being one of them, we've done this since the Bronze Age with every technological revolution. And we've had to re-articulate our tradition in a way that feels authentic in an entirely new medium. And goodness knows we can do it today in a way that benefits our own traditions and also helps clarify the boundaries and the distinctions between them in a way that is positive, pluralistic, and also amplified well online. Because unfortunately, the haters find it very easy to amplify themselves. Everyone goes and rubbernecks when someone says something disgusting. We too, as religious leaders, have the opportunity to amplify something more positive that is really instructive, that helps people cultivate themselves in this new forum.
Thank you for that. It leads into my next question, which is, it would be very easy for you to actually react to that Christian leader and say, what are you doing? In our moment of sorrow, you're doing this, are you salt in the wounds? Instead, you decided to say, oh, I'm curious about this. Can we talk further? And it brings me to the question that I want to ask all the panelists, if you're interested in answering it, which is, is there a preparation for the kind of engagement on the internet that might be different than in person? They talk about disassociation with the internet, so that you are like less likely to you're less likely to kind of own what's coming out of you. There's been a lot of research about this, and people feel kind of disconnected, and they can be more extreme in a lot of different ways. And I'm just wondering, for any of you, do you put on a particular spiritual force around you when you try to enter into these spaces to be the kind of person that you want to be as an interfaith leader online?
So I think that there are two aspects. One is the idea that there's a human being on the other side of a given comment and quote. And religion and spirituality, some of the universal themes, are recognizing the human being in atypical circumstances. And insofar as we're able to humanize each other, we can turn curses into blessings. I mean, that's one of the famous stories from my tradition is basically someone who sought to curse the Jewish people and for the life of him could not, was almost impeded from doing so, and ended up blessing them. And maybe we can be the instruments who inspire the humanization that elevates the conversation and changes the way we interact. There's also in many traditions the notion of the pause. It's a bechira point in Hebrew, we would say, a point in which we have to choose. And pausing just long enough online to formulate a response to something or generate an initial line of conversation that is better than it otherwise could be is worth everything. And it's not to say I'm perfect. I am highly imperfect in my responses, but in the moments when I am able to follow the sacred mindfulness practice of giving myself just one more breath between receiving a signal and responding to it, those tend to be really sacred moments that don't necessarily happen with other Jewish people, but create a spark of the sacred between myself and someone else online.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's wonderful. And in fact, when I teach my course, the very first part of the course is about self-mastery, because I feel like we are always out there trying to change the world, right? And very few of us take into account when we go online the impacts that it's having on us and our responses to it, right? And if we don't understand those things, we don't understand our impulses and the reactions and the way that we interact with the technology, then we're just not going to be effective in our communications. So that is a really important piece. And you can, I mean, I think every tradition has this kind of idea of a sacred pause. I think that's a really important and valuable piece. And the other thing, again, I'll reiterate, is viewing it as going online instead of going online or viewing it as a tool or a platform. I look at it as a space, right? And the thing is, we don't have this problem in real space. Like if I go to Times Square in New York City, it's sensory overload, right? I know that I'm exposed. I know that there are all these different people around me. We know when we go into all these different spaces offline that there are normative behaviors and that there are things that are acceptable and not acceptable. We know when we need to be aware of danger and all of these other things. When we go online, we think that we're sitting at home in our pajamas on the couch with our laptop. Right? We don't look at it as being fully exposed to this random and incredibly diverse, place. And I think that having that mentality and looking at it in that way when you go online allows you to take that pause, right? Because you don't feel like you can take anything for granted out there. You learn to stop and quote unquote read the room when you walk into a digital space, and you conduct yourself according to the cues that you get from the communities that you're part of online. And I think that protects you, and it also keeps you from saying or doing things that you might regret or that make you look like you don't know what you're doing online. It allows you to measure your responses a little better.
Yeah, I love hearing from you. I mean, one of the interesting things I'm realizing now is no one ever taught us how to do this. I mean, at least for me, no one taught me how to do this, and it was a lot of it was just figuring it out on your own. And I think sitting with you both, Josh and Amanda, like we're friends outside of this, and I'm not surprised to hear you say what you're saying, but like we haven't even talked about any of this, and like it's cool that we're on the same page and like we use some of the same practices, but they're kind of like self-created. And I think it's scary to me to realize that. I watch how conversations are conducted online, and it's no surprise, right? Like no one's teaching anyone what it, like the kinds of things you're talking about. So like, thank you for the question, Paul. I mean, for me, there are a couple of things so yes to everything you've said, Josh and Amanda, and there's one thing you said in particular, Amanda, that I found really helpful to recognize that I wasn't totally attuned to before. And that's the kind of the trap of trying to build a platform. Like you can really easily get sucked into this idea that like, the way to get the most followers is to get the most attention, and the way to get the most attention is to be the most outrageous. And like, in some senses, right, like the kind of work and the kinds of things we care about, it is outrageous and it's appropriate for us to be outraged. But in other senses, like you start doing that and you get, like if you get lost in the game of trying to build a platform without any sort of compass of what you're doing and why you're doing it. And it's happened to me too. You just get sucked in. You get sucked into the toxicity and you start playing that game, and like all of a sudden, and this has been my experience, all of a sudden you're not advancing a particular mission. Like you're not actually like doing what you care about. While in your mind you tell yourself like, well, I'm doing this for a larger goal, right? And like we all know that sort of defense or justification, like that's a pretty slippery slope. I think the way that just so one is like even just becoming aware to the fact that like you are vulnerable to that too. Like that was really helpful to me. Like the moment I realized what I was doing, I was like, oh man, I want to stop doing that. Right. Like that was it. But like that, then I've been able to kind of hold on to that feeling since. The other thing that's been really helpful to me, and this is also sort of like unintentional. I mean, it's intentional in a sense. Like when I was a teenager, our family was like super nerdy, and my dad is the nerd of all nerds. So we used to sit down and do like family meetings every week, and we would have when I was a teenager, one year he brought in a leadership consultant, and we created a family mission, vision, and like value statement. And so like as a 15-year-old, I was like, what are we doing? This is horrible. But those values that we identified then have stuck with me to the point now that like, and this is where it actually becomes useful. Again, no one's teaching us or talking to us about values. Like, what is it why are you doing what you're doing? But if you can have some clarity around that, and Amanda, this is what you were speaking to, and Josh, you were referring to this as well. If you have some clarity around who you are and what type of person you want to be, it's much easier to not get lost in the way that we easily can in this ocean, right? It's so easy. And the other reason that I found this so useful, and why I really encourage young people to do this, is that it keeps you from getting in trouble too, right? Like it's so easy to, in a moment of anger, just type up something, tweet it out, and then like 3 years down the line, you apply for a job and it comes back and bites you in the butt, right? Like that happens all the time. And so like when you have clarity around why am I posting this? How does this fit into the person I want to be? Well, how does it align with my values? It's protective in that sense too. So those two things have been super helpful for me personally.
And to underscore all that's been said, to recognize that the technology actually invites a certain recklessness. And so you have to be on guard. And also, especially, I remember being in a room where someone said to young people, oh, well, you all know all about the internet. And I was like, no, they don't. I mean, none of us do. No one, just because you it's like, oh, well, you were born in America, you know all the American history. No, we don't. And so like learn more knowledge. I do want to encourage those who are with us to put questions. The Q&A is open now, and so we encourage questions for the latter part of our time together. I do want to encourage each of you to offer some insight about the specific platforms that you find important and for your work. Different platforms, different ways of engaging online are very different. A lot of people now, it's, when we talk about the internet or online leadership, we're talking about technologies that span from texting to emails to, going online on our laptop. So all of this is part of what it means to be connected, and there's lots of ways to use it. we're also recognizing that, you know, there are certain places, and specifically where people are trying to foster and foment violence and hatred. And I'm curious if any of you have ever had an experience of being parts of efforts to counteract that, or in your own way. And so I just want to, I'm opening up kind of two different areas of questioning, but I would love to hear something about the platforms that you feel most comfortable in, and then also a little bit about what it means to go quite to the heart of where hatred of different faith traditions, as well as race and gender and all of those things are part of a whole. I'm curious if any of you have felt called to that kind of work.
Yeah, just an example that feels somewhat salient. I think, first of all, historically in all of our traditions, we are supposed to bring messages of hope and higher purpose into places that might not have it. So the idea that traditionally Jews read Torah on Mondays and Thursdays comes from literally the practice of bringing a Torah scroll and reading it in the marketplace, where people might have been engaged in less than savory behaviors. For us now, that's largely on Twitter, on Facebook, elsewhere. And there was a point this winter when unlikely allies stood up in solidarity with the American Jewish community in the Jewish community in New York City. And in this case, someone who is very critical. At the same time, I do not consider an investment. And she and I have been engaged in a lot of private dialogues about sort of bounds of what is anti-Semitic and what is not, and how you define that. And a lot of difficult conversations for myself as a progressive Zionist and for her as a Palestinian American about how that plays out in tough contexts. And on Twitter, after she helped organize a rally in support of the Jewish community in a way that felt to me to be totally authentic and altruistic and simply a sign of interfaith solidarity, a lot of members of my own community were attacking her as trying to sort of whitewash her anti-Semitism. And I actually got very involved in some of these conversations saying, hey, I supported the planning of this rally and attended it, knowing that she was planning it, because you have to give people the chance to express their goodness, even if you disagree with other parts of how they express themselves. And you have to engage with and enable people to be full and complicated creatures online, much as they are in person. And I felt like people in my own community were not wrestling in a way that felt comfortable to me with the complexity of engaging with someone who is an anti-Zionist and holds positions that I hold to be really problematic, without reducing her to those views alone. And so I think there are ways that we can signal boost and give people space when they might not otherwise have it to articulate themselves with nuance, rather than being cornered and lambasted online. And insofar as we can be allies to people who are having their voices limited, that can be important. And I think especially in the case of unlikely allies to our own communities, at times when we need those allies.
I just want to mention, I remember that interaction, and that you got attacked. And I think that, you know, it was incumbent on many of us who knew you and know the person you're talking about to say, hey, I support this engagement. You know, we all have a role to play, or at least a role to play in saying, I support constructive disagreement. You know, I think that there's ways to show up for one another. Dr. Singh, do you have anything to add to this conversation, or I can go to one of the questions?
Yeah, sure. No, I do. And I want to touch on something that Josh was talking about earlier. And it comes to this question of for me at least, it comes to a question of what it means to have a voice. So for minoritized and marginalized communities who for so long haven't had access to media in any way. This technology is creating opportunities for us to speak for ourselves in a way that we never have been before, and to make connections. And so all of a sudden, I think the advent of social media has created this avenue for invisibilized communities to become visible, whereas Sikhs, for example, have been in this country for 130 years now, and have largely been rendered invisible. All of a sudden, we are able to create spaces, and what we have then been able to do is parlay our voices on social media into traditional media, and then we enter into public consciousness in a way that we haven't before. And why does that matter? Like, it's not just that it's cool to be noticed. It's also that for communities on the margins where being unseen also means being targets of violence, this is actually, like, the stakes are pretty high. Like, this can be the difference between life or death, right? Like, people knowing who we are and people being able to see our humanity. And so for many communities who don't typically or traditionally or historically have access to power, like, these technologies are being leveraged very intentionally in many cases to say, hey, this is a way for us to try and equal the playing field. And also, like, it's not just a power play or like something that's institutional or systemic. It's also like, hey, this is a way for me to create safety for my kids and my family and my parents, right? So it's very much personal.
Can I ask you, have you been able to change views? I view you as using Twitter and other social media far more effectively than I, and you're really a leading light there. Have you seen people change their views? Have you been able to persuade people or create not just visibility, but hopefully security for the Sikh community?
I think, so there are two things I would say. I think what I've learned, and a lot of this learning has come post 2016, and as many of you who are watching probably know, like, the toxicity online has really exponentially expanded, especially with, like, bots and trolls and all that sort of thing. And so what I've had to sort of accept, in a sense, which was not something I was willing to accept before, is that, like, you can't change everyone's minds, and it shouldn't be your goal to change everyone's mind. If your goal is to have everybody think like you, like, you're never going to be happy. You'll never reach that goal, and so you'll never be satisfied. And so that was my goal before. I just wanted everyone to like me, and that's kind of like my personality as it is. And so the goal really changed to say, I want to provide perspectives for people who don't have access to it. There's this beautiful James Baldwin quote that was really helpful to me. And he says, if I love you, then I have to make you conscious of the things you don't see. And that quotation, to me, like, that's what it's become for me. Like, I don't really care about if people agree with my politics anymore. Like, all I want, and this is, like, what my entire online presence has become, like, all I want is for people to see each other's humanity. And there are all sorts of tools available to us to do that, right? Like, it's talking about your kids, or it's just like being a normal human, right? But, like, as everyone on this conversation has mentioned already, like, the technology is actually structured in such a way that it strips away our humanity. So, like, it takes conscious effort for us to show our humanity and to be vulnerable, and then to invite other people in and to view things differently, right? Like, it takes quite a bit of work, but that, to me, has become a really big shift in how I think about this.
Dr. Quraishi, can we try again?
Sure. Can you hear me? Okay, but I'm not a doctor.
You just gotten a PhD. I did it like that.
Wow. Okay, I have a couple things quickly before Q&A. One, I want to thank Rabbi Stanton, because what he mentioned, his the courage to stand up, right? Like, when you feel the online hordes coming for you, it is you can't minimize what that does psychologically and emotionally and spiritually. I mean, you are having, an effect. It's having an effect on you. And so to me, the moral courage to stand up, and not just for, all the things that we want to stand up for, but also to stand up for the things that we need to stand up for, and to assert ourselves in a space that is increasingly, black and white and rigid and punitive is important. And my hope is that we see more leaders making that effort, because we're losing ground, right? And I'm not the type of person that thinks everything can be equal all the time, and that, there's a big soft mushy middle we should all be happy in. But what I do think is that we have to be able to be willing to engage in deliberative democracy, which means really rigorous back and forth conversations without destroying the fabric of our society. And that is not happening right now. It's very, very scary. One of the reasons, I think, is because, way back when social media was a new thing, the people that blazed the trails online were marketers, right? And so, as is usually the case, right? It's for-profit companies that are out there blazing these trails. So a lot of what you see in activism and in leadership online right now is really just the application of hard marketing tactics. And marketing by its nature is antisocial. And so you're not going to get the kind of community and the kind of spaces online where you can be productive if you're doing that, if that's the norm. So, I do agree with my friend Simran. I absolutely agree that you can't, be all things to all people, but I'm a marketing person. I mean, that is my profession. I'm not a religious leader. And I will say that as a marketing person, if I go to my boss and I tell her, look, we couldn't get it done. This campaign has failed, and it failed because people are too stupid to get it, or they're bad people, I'm going to get fired, right? Because my job is to meet people where they are and to make sure that they get my message, right? And that means having empathy and understanding exactly where they are coming from before I craft my message. That is what it means to be a professional communicator. And so these are all very, very basic things in the world of professional communications, but again, this isn't something that we're all raised to do. These are not second nature things. These are competencies that have to be learned. And at this point, we are all communicators professionally, regardless of our role, if we're online. And so we really need to take a cue on what is it, these are the basic rules. What is your message? who are you trying to reach? What are you trying to accomplish? And what are the tools and the places and the spaces where that's happening? And then you work within those parameters. You don't just get to walk in to any old space and do and say whatever you want and then be mad that people don't get it.
Thank you so much for that great reminder. We have some super questions. I'm gonna read all of them. I'm gonna take a round, and then I want each of you to respond to whatever sparks your interest. All of these questions are good. The first one involves ritual, and what are ways that ritual plays out in interfaith leadership online? Can it? How would it? Another one just really wanted to go deeper with you. Everyone's calling you Dr. Quraishi. This is a banner day for you, but I blame Dr. Singh, who I think started it. But anyway, this is a question really about the formats, the strategies of how to have a good conversation online. I think that might be something that they could pursue with you in your institute, but it is really interesting and its own important element. There's another one about service and how service online can happen. What does it mean to be of service online? When we talk about a lot of service projects, it's like the backbone. That and food, I think, are the backbone of interfaith engagement. But what does it look like to create service opportunities in the digital space? That I love, and I'm really interested in how you would try that. Oh, so another question is about preaching to the choir. How are we making sure that we're not preaching to the choir? I think all of you have mentioned these, that it's very easy not to be preaching to the choir online, but I do think that that's important if you feel like you're only talking to people who you already want to be talking to. And and then there's just basically a big shout out from someone named Sister Martha Ann Kirk. Dr. Singh, does that name ring a bell? She's giving a shout out to your dad.
It does, yeah. She's a interfaith celebrity in San Antonio.
Okay, well, she's watching you. She's making sure that you're behaving, and she's also just saying that she's grateful for what is being shared. So in the last few minutes that we have, if you could all just take 2 minutes and close with whatever you feel inspired.
I'll say a word on the question of preaching to the choir because it's one that I think about often. I think part of that thinking comes to us from the dualistic outlook of like it's us versus them. Like either they agree with us or they disagree with us. And if they disagree, we're not going to move them. And if they agree, what's the point of talking? But I think what I've learned is, especially when it comes to the things about humanity that are complex, which is like people, right? Like our individuality. It's not so black and white. These conversations can be, and really have been for me, enriching. Like they can be informative, right? Josh talked about religious literacy. Like, hey, I don't know about Judaism. I didn't know about this particular issue with the fish and the menorah. Like, oh, let me learn about that. That's cool. Or it can be something that's very much like, I haven't experienced what Amanda has as a Muslim woman in Texas. Like, let me just hear about her life. Or it could be affirmative in like, oh, hey, there aren't many Sikhs around here. Like, it's cool for me to hear from someone else who has a turban and beard and can just say like, oh, I know what your life is like, right? Like these sorts of things are really powerful to the people expressing them. And the opportunities are manifold, but I think the question is less about whether we're preaching. The question should be less about who the audience is, right? Like the audience is there. The question is, what is our mode of engagement? Like, are we preaching or are we sharing? Are we communicating? Are we educating? Are we listening? Like there are all sorts of ways to engage with with these audiences online. And I think that to me is what's been most helpful in thinking about that.
Rabbi?
Sure. I think one of the interesting elements today is that we are seeing an acceleration in the creation of social norms online. And we are home more than ever before out of necessity. We are engaging with people online more than ever before. And as a result, we are starting to establish those norms and those best practices. And there is a key role for religious leaders to play in them, because we are often people who help develop ritual of all kinds. And I have unfortunately had to officiate at more Zoom funerals than I would have ever wanted to in the last month. And as much as initially they invariably have a degree of awkwardness, they become very real very quickly. And so we can, in fact, create sacred space and sacred experiences and even rituals that I would deem holy online and in new fora than ever before. And that gives me hope that in many of the places that we have not yet been able to elevate discourse, we might, especially right now. People are more vulnerable, more open, and more connective. And so we can get done the work that would normally take a decade in the next month. And so now it's incumbent upon us as interfaith leaders to do so. How can we teach, preach, elevate the humanity in one another? And how can we do so in a new medium? And if all of us can find one meaningful way in the next month, we will have done real sacred service for all of humanity at a time that is filled with pain for so many.
I absolutely agree with that, 110%. And just to riff off of that and touch on the points, the questions about how do we have create a culture of service, and how do we, do these other things online? I think that we are kind of learning that very quickly in this pandemic, when we're all kind of forced to be online. And I think there's lots more room for us to explore that. And I think that the best place to start with that would be to find out from the people who are in need. So I know that a lot of my friends who have various disabilities are suddenly very excited because they're able to participate in things online that they otherwise would not have been able to, right? The kinds of events that they may not have been able to get to in the past. And so let's talk to people who need things and see what we can do for them online, and then start building things out from there.
Thank you so much to all three of you, to all of you with your wonderful questions, for being with us for this hour. We are all learning. We are all learners. We are all leaders. And I think this idea of we are with one another, even when we're apart. We are humans together, even though it's pixelated. And so I am filled with the feeling of being blessed and the many blessings that have been shared today. I look forward to this conversation continuing in myriad of forms in the future. Thanks again to all three of you for your time today, and all of you who have joined us online. Be well.